The sharp crack of a three-ring binder hitting the conference table echoed through the Strategic Air Command briefing room like a judge's gavel announcing sentence. 0800 hours. 43 Air Force officers turned in perfect unison, their conversations dying mid-word. Jessica Whitmore froze in the doorway, the stack of unclassified personnel rosters clutched against her chest. She was 35 years old, 5'5", 135 pounds, wearing khaki contractor pants and a plain blue blouse that had seen better days. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a tight bun more precise than regulation required. The contractor badge clipped to her belt read "Secret Clearance" in faded letters below her name. Colonel Brad Hutchinson stood at the front of the room, laser pointer in hand, mid-gesture toward a classified map displaying red flag exercise formations. He was 42, 6'1", 195 pounds of muscle slowly surrendering to middle-age comfort. His pale blue eyes tracked Jessica with the focus of a predator noticing movement in tall grass. "Excuse me, sweetheart," Hutchinson said, his voice carrying that particular tone men use when they want an audience for their condescension. "The secretarial pool is 2 floors down. This is a restricted operations briefing." 43 phones stayed in 43 pockets, but the attention was total. Jessica felt the weight of every stare as she stepped forward, her worn sneakers silent on the polished floor. "I'm delivering updated training schedules from Colonel Warren's office, sir," Jessica said quietly, her voice neutral as tap water. "Unclassified administrative documents for the red flag participant roster." Hutchinson plucked the papers from her hands without asking, examining them like they might be written in crayon. His eyes found her contractor badge and his smile sharpened. "Government Services Level 7. He read it aloud for the room's benefit. "What's that? One step above the janitorial staff?" Laughter rippled through the briefing room. Not huge belly laughs, but the knowing chuckles of people grateful they weren't the target. Major Kyle Patterson, 38 years old, with red hair cut military short, laughed loudest from his position by the coffee station. "Does she even have clearance to be in here?" Patterson asked, directing the question to Hutchinson rather than Jessica, as if she were a piece of furniture under discussion. Jessica's jaw tightened for exactly half a second before her face returned to professional neutrality. In the back of the room, Master Sergeant Angela Price watched this micro-expression with the focus of someone who'd spent 25 years reading body language in combat zones. "I have proper secret clearance, sir," Jessica said. "These documents are unclassified. Colonel Warren sent me to deliver them per his direct request." Captain Diana Mercer, 33, blonde hair touching her shoulders in the longest style regulations permitted, leaned toward the lieutenant beside her. Her whisper carried perfectly to Jessica's position by the door. "I heard they give contractor badges to anyone now. Probably married some airman for base access." More chuckles. Jessica's hands, empty now of papers, hung at her sides. Her fingers didn't curl into fists. They didn't tremble. They simply existed in perfect neutral rest position, thumbs aligned with trouser seams in a way no civilian naturally stood. Price noticed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What's your educational background, honey?" Hutchinson was warming to his audience now, that particular stripe of bully who mistakes cruelty for charisma. "I have the qualifications required for my position, sir." "That's not what I asked." Hutchinson set the papers down on the conference table without looking at them. "Humor me. Where'd you go to school?" The room had gone completely silent now. Someone in the third row was absolutely recording this on their phone, holding it low against their thigh. Jessica saw it in her peripheral vision but didn't react. "University of Maryland, sir." "And what did you study at the University of Maryland?" Hutchinson drew out each word like he was talking to a child learning to read. Jessica's eyes found a spot on the wall 6 inches above Hutchinson's head, the way recruits were taught to handle drill sergeants. "Intelligence studies, sir." The laughter this time was louder. Patterson actually slapped his knee. Intelligence studies, Hutchinson repeated, letting the irony hang in the air like smoke. Senior Airman Tyler Gomez, 24 years old and eager to prove himself to the officers around him, piped up from his position near the projector. Maybe she flunked out of the actual intelligence career field. Happens to people who can't hack the real work. Jessica said nothing. She turned toward. Ward the filing cabinet against the left wall where she'd been instructed to leave additional copies. Her movements were economical, efficient, each step covering exactly the distance required without wasted motion. Price watched her walk. Shoulders back, head up, eyes forward. Weight balanced on the balls of her feet despite the flat sneakers. That wasn't the posture of someone defeated by years of bureaucratic work. That was the posture of someone who'd learned to move through hostile territory without attracting attention. Jessica reached the filing cabinet and opened the second drawer, her fingers moving through the alphabetical dividers without hesitation. She found the red flag section and began inserting the documents in perfect chronological order, newest to oldest, classification markers all facing the same direction. "Hey, file girl," Mercer called out. "You understand what red flag means, or should someone explain it to you in small words?" Jessica's hands paused for exactly 1 second, then continued their work. "I know what red flag is, ma'am." "Oh, she knows," Patterson said, his voice dripping with theatrical surprise. "Probably thinks it's some kind of dating app warning system." The laughter was building now, feeding on itself. Gomez practically bounced with excitement at being included in the officer's banter. "Swipe left on the MiGs, swipe right on the F-22s, Gomez added, pleased with his own wit. Jessica closed the filing cabinet with a soft click. She turned back toward the door, her face showing nothing. Not anger, not embarrassment, not hurt. Just professional neutrality that somehow made the mockery feel even more cruel. "Are we done here, sir?" she asked Hutchinson. "I have other deliveries to complete." Hutchinson waved his hand dismissively. "Yeah, we're done. Try not to get lost on your way back to wherever they keep the office supplies." Jessica walked toward the door. As she passed the conference table, her eyes tracked across the classified map displayed on the main screen. Her gaze lingered for maybe 2 seconds on the tactical formations, the aircraft designations, the timing windows marked in red. Price saw those 2 seconds. Saw the way Jessica's eyes moved in a specific pattern, left to right, top to bottom, the way analysts were trained to process complex visual information quickly. Then Jessica was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss. The briefing room erupted in conversation, officers laughing and returning to their coffee and tablets. Hutchinson resumed his presentation, laser pointer dancing across enemy air defense positions. In the back row, Master Sergeant Angela Price sat very still, her coffee cooling in her hand. She'd spent 3 years in Afghanistan working alongside NSA personnel. She'd watched intelligence analysts process battlefield information under fire. And she'd just watched a contractor file clerk scan a classified tactical display with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Something didn't add up. Something about Jessica Whitemore didn't add up at all. The morning break hit at 09:30 hours, and the briefing room emptied into the adjacent hallway like water through a broken dam. Jessica stood at the corridor's far end, organizing another stack of documents on a wheeled cart, her movements methodical and unhurried. Major Patterson approached first, coffee in hand. Captain Mercer half a step behind him. Senior Airman Gomez trailed both like an eager puppy hoping for scraps of approval. "Hey, contractor," Patterson called out, loud enough that the dozen officers still filtering out of the briefing room turned to watch. "Got a question for you. You understand this is a secure facility, right? Maybe you should step outside while we discuss operational matters." Jessica looked up from her cart, her gray eyes flat and unrevealing. "I'm in the hallway, sir. This is an open administrative area. I have proper clearance for my assigned duties." "Proper clearance," Mercer repeated, her voice sticky with false sweetness. She turned to address the growing audience of spectators. That's cute. She thinks a contractor secret clearance means something. Patterson leaned against the wall, deliberately blocking Jessica's path to the elevator. Let me guess. You married some enlisted guy, got yourself a dependent ID, figured out you could get a cushy base job pushing papers? Am I close? No, sir. No? Patterson's eyebrows climbed theatrically. Then how does someone with an intelligent studies degree end up filing folders? That's like training to be a surgeon and becoming a receptionist. Jessica's hand stilled on the documents. When she spoke, her voice remained level, but something underneath it had gone very cold. Sometimes people's career paths don't follow straight lines, sir. I'm sure you understand that. The dig was so subtle that Patterson almost missed it. His face darkened when it landed. Behind him, Gomez snickered nervously, unsure if he was supposed to laugh. Mercer stepped closer, her phone now openly in her hand, angled to capture Jessica's face. This is going to make a great story for the group chat. Contractor thinks she's clever. Jessica's eyes flicked to the phone, then away. She reached for a 3-ring binder on the top shelf of her cart. The movement was casual, unthinking. Gomez, emboldened by the presence of senior officers, decided to contribute. He grabbed another binder from the cart and tossed it carelessly onto the pile. The weight distribution shifted. 3 binders slid toward the edge. Jessica's hand snapped out and caught all 3 before they hit the ground, one-handed. Her fingers found the balance point automatically, weight distributed perfectly across her palm, other hand already moving to stabilize the stack. The motion was economical, reflexive, and completely wrong for a file clerk. Patterson's smile faltered. Nice catch. Thank you, sir. Jessica restacked the binders with precise alignment, spines facing outward, classification markers all oriented identically. You play sports? Mercer asked, her tone shifting slightly, suspicion creeping in around the edges of her mockery. Not recently, ma'am. Gomez, oblivious to the subtle change in atmosphere, reached for Jessica's cart and gave it a sharp shove. The cart rolled backward, crashed into the wall, and tipped. Documents scattered across the polished floor in a cascade of paper and plastic dividers. Oops, Gomez said, grinning. Guess you better clean that up, contractor. Jessica looked at the mess, looked at Gomez, said nothing. Airman First Class David Park emerged from the briefing room, saw the scattered papers, and his young face flushed with anger. That's not cool, man. Nobody asked you, Park, Gomez shot back. Mind your business. She's just trying to do her job, Park insisted, his voice cracking slightly with nerves but holding steady. He was 22, skinny, idealistic, in the way people were before the military fully sanded down their edges. And what's it to you? Mercer's eyes narrowed dangerously. You got a thing for the help, Airman? Park's flush deepened, but he held his ground. I'm just saying it's unprofessional, ma'am. You're dismissed, Park, Patterson said flatly, before you talk yourself into paperwork. Park hesitated, looked at Jessica. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. He swallowed hard and retreated down the hallway, glancing back twice. Jessica knelt and began gathering papers. Her movements were efficient, sorting as she collected. Administrative documents in one pile, training rosters in another, classified cover sheets carefully separated and stacked with red borders aligned. Patterson watched her work. You seem to know a lot about document handling protocols. It's my job, sir. Right. Patterson exchanged a glance with Mercer. Your job, filing papers. Very important work. Jessica stood, papers organized in her arms. As she turned to place them back on the cart, her sleeve rode up slightly. Just an inch, just enough. Mercer's eyes locked on to Jessica's left forearm. A burn scar, old and silvered, ran from wrist toward elbow. And beneath it, partially visible, the edge of a tattoo. Numbers. Military-style numerals in a specific font. What's that tattoo? Mercer asked, her voice suddenly sharp. Jessica's sleeve dropped back into place like a curtain falling. It's not relevant to my work, ma'am. Let me see it. It's not relevant to my work, ma'am. The hallway had gone quiet. The officers who'd been drifting toward the elevators had stopped, sensing drama the way sharks sense blood in water. Patterson pushed off the wall. You know what I think? I think you're one of those wannabes. Dated a soldier, got some military ink to feel special. Now you hang around bases pretending you're part of something. Jessica finished loading her cart. I need to complete my deliveries, sir. Excuse me. She moved toward the elevator. Gomez stepped in front of her. We're talking to you, contractor. For exactly 3 seconds, Jessica went completely still. Her weight shifted almost imperceptible onto the balls of her feet. Her shoulders squared. Her hands, resting on the cart handle, adjusted their grip with her knuckles firm and aligned at efficient angles. In the doorway to the briefing room, Master Sergeant Price saw it happen, saw the transformation. That wasn't defensive posture. That was a combat assessment. Price had seen it 100 times in forward operating bases when soldiers evaluated threats. Then, Jessica's body language shifted back to civilian casualness so smoothly it might have been imagination. "Please move, Airman," Jessica said quietly. Or what? Gomez was playing to the crowd now, feeding off their attention. Or I'll file a complaint with security forces for harassment. Gomez laughed. Yeah, I'm real scared of Gomez. Price's voice cut through the hallway like a blade. She stood in the briefing room doorway, arms crossed, her expression carved from stone. Step aside, now. Gomez's face went through several expressions before settling on sullen compliance. He moved. Jessica pushed her cart toward the elevator without another word. The doors opened immediately, as if the building itself wanted her gone. She stepped inside, turned, and her gray eyes swept across the assembled officers with a flatness that made Mercer's skin prickle. The doors closed. "What's your problem, Master Sergeant?" Patterson asked Price, irritation clear in his voice. Price looked at him for a long moment. "No problem, sir. Just didn't want to see a harassment complaint derail the red flag preparation schedule. Paperwork's a pain." She turned and walked back into the briefing room, leaving the officers in the hallway to return to their break. But Price couldn't shake what she'd seen. The catch, the stance, the way Jessica had organized those documents by classification level without thinking about it. The tattoo that looked military-specific. Price had worked with enough intelligence personnel to recognize the signs, and every sign pointed to the same impossible conclusion. That contractor wasn't a contractor, or at least she hadn't always been. The afternoon session reconvened at 1400 hours. Jessica returned with a fresh stack of personnel files, her expression unchanged from the morning's humiliation. She moved to the same filing cabinet, methodical as clockwork. Colonel Hutchinson was deep into tactical scenarios when he noticed her. Something about her presence irritated him in a way he couldn't articulate. Maybe it was how she'd remained unnervingly calm during the mockery. Maybe it was Major Patterson's comment about her knowing document protocols too well. "Hold on," Hutchinson said, stopping mid-sentence. "Our contractor friend is back." 43 heads turned, again. Jessica continued filing, her back to the room. "Since you're so interested in our work," Hutchinson continued, his voice taking on a tone that made several officers shift uncomfortably, "why don't you come up here and educate us?" Jessica's hands stilled. "Sir, I'm just here to file documents." "I know what you're here for. I'm asking you to do something else. Come here." It wasn't a request. Jessica turned slowly and walked to the front of the room. 67 people now crowded the briefing space, word having spread during lunch that something entertaining was happening. Phones appeared in hands like conjured objects. Hutchinson gestured to the large display screen showing the red flag operational map. A complex web of aircraft routes, timing windows, threat rings, and engagement zones covered the classified tactical overlay. Color-coded call signs marked friendly and enemy positions. You studied intelligence at University of Maryland, right? Let's test that education. Hutchinson's smile was sharp enough to cut. Tell me what you see here. You've got 30 seconds. Major Patterson leaned against the wall, arms crossed. This should be good. This is graduate-level operational planning. Captain Mercer had her phone up again, recording from her position near the door. Several junior officers did the same, creating a constellation of camera lenses all focused on Jessica. Jessica looked at the map. Her eyes moved across it in a deliberate pattern. Left to right, top to bottom, then back in diagonal sweeps. The silence stretched for exactly 15 seconds. "Clock's ticking, contractor," Hutchinson said. Jessica's voice, when she spoke, had changed. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by clinical precision. Multi-domain SAD operation, suppression of enemy air defenses. 4 primary attack vectors coordinated with cyber and electronic warfare elements. Hutchinson's smile flickered. "Northern Corridor," Jessica continued, her finger hovering near the screen without touching it, features 3 F-22 Raptors in sweep formation, call signs Viper, Falcon, and Hawk. They're establishing air superiority at H-hour minus 30 minutes. Southern approach shows EA-18G Growlers, call signs Jammer 1 and 2, handling electronic countermeasures. The room had gone very quiet. Eastern Vector deploys F-35 Lightning IIs for precision strikes on SAM installations, timing window between H+15 and H+45. Western Corridor maintains a reserve force of F-16s for contingency response and combat air patrol. Patterson's arms had uncrossed. He was standing straight now, staring. Jessica's eyes tracked across the timing windows marked in red. Ground element initiates at H+3 hours with coordinated artillery suppression. Cyber component target T's enemy integrated air defense network 12 minutes prior to first aircraft crossing the FIBA. She paused. That's forward edge of the bow area, for anyone wondering. Someone in the back dropped their phone. The clatter was explosively loud in the silence. "The operational concept," Jessica said, her voice still neutral and professional, "is to create a corridor of suppressed air defenses, allowing follow-on strike packages to penetrate high-value target areas with reduced attrition probability." She turned to look at Hutchinson. "There's a problem with your northern corridor, though." Hutchinson's face had drained of color. "What problem?" "The SAM coverage gap you're exploiting at H+3 hours assumes enemy batteries maintain standard 8-hour rotation schedules. Recent intelligence suggests near-peer adversaries have shifted to 6-hour rotations specifically to catch this type of exploitation. Your window closes 90 minutes earlier than planned." The room erupted in whispers. Master Sergeant Price stood up in the back, her face carved from granite, saying nothing but seeing everything. "How?" Patterson started, then stopped. "How do you know enemy rotation schedules?" Jessica's face showed the first crack of emotion, alarm. She'd said too much. The intelligence updates that come through archives sometimes have." "Archives don't get operational intelligence summaries," Mercer said, her phone still recording but her voice shaken. "That information is compartmental." Colonel Hutchinson found his footing again, anger replacing shock. "You memorized someone's briefing. That's what happened. You heard officers discussing this and memorized it to show off." "Sir, I've never heard anyone discuss this specific operation." "Then where did you learn call signs, aircraft specifications, FIBA terminology?" Hutchinson's voice rose. "Those aren't things civilians know." Jessica said nothing. Her jaw worked silently, fighting some internal battle. Captain Mercer stepped forward, emboldened by Hutchinson's anger. "Fine, you memorized some terms. Explain the cyber component then." "Bet you can't." Gomez added eagerly. "Yeah, tell us about network penetration protocols. That's not Googleable." Jessica looked at the floor, then back up. I shouldn't." "Shouldn't?" Patterson laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Or can't?" "Shouldn't," Jessica repeated firmly. I'm making it an order, Hutchinson snapped. Explain the cyber operations component of this scenario. You can't order me, sir. I'm a civilian contractor. You have no command authority over my speech. The quiet that followed was different than before. This wasn't the silence of anticipation. This was the silence of people realizing they'd cornered something dangerous. Hutchinson's face went red. Better yet, explain how you defeat this operation. As the enemy, show us how smart you really are. For 3 long seconds, Jessica stood perfectly still. Then her shoulders sagged slightly, as if surrendering to inevitability. You want the enemy's counter-strategy? Yeah, entertain us. Jessica turned back to the map. When she spoke again, her voice had gone completely flat, professional. The voice of someone who'd briefed these scenarios under very different circumstances. First layer, electronic warfare. Target the Link 16 data link integration with focused jamming on specific frequencies to disrupt network-centric coordination without revealing jammer positions. Second layer, mobile SAM repositioning. Your intelligence is based on static positions, so displacement of S-400 systems by 30 kilometers north creates coverage gaps in your assumed safe corridors. She pointed to specific grid coordinates without hesitation. Third layer, cyber intrusion targeting the AN/APY2 radar systems supporting your AWACS coverage. Exploit the known firmware vulnerability in the signal processing architecture to inject false returns, degrading battlefield awareness. Fourth layer, deploy false infrared signatures using decoy emitters to force premature weapons release, depleting precision munitions before reaching actual high-value targets. The briefing room had 70 witnesses now. People were crowding the doorway, filling every available space. Your operational timeline assumes 37 minutes from H-hour to objective penetration, Jessica continued. With these countermeasures, you're looking at mission abort or catastrophic attrition rates exceeding 20%. The entire operation collapses. She turned back to face Hutchinson. Her gray eyes were hard as flint. That answer your question, sir? Colonel Brad Hutchinson, decorated F-16 pilot with 2 combat tours, stood speechless in front of a woman who just dismantled his operational plan with the casual precision of someone who'd done it professionally for years. Major Patterson found his voice first. Where did you learn those classified system designations? AN/APY2 isn't public information. S-400 capabilities are compartmented intelligence. Jessica's face closed down like a door slamming. I'm not authorized to discuss my knowledge base, sir. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm permitted to give. The questioning didn't stop. If anything, it intensified like a feeding frenzy. Officers crowded closer, their earlier mockery curdling into something harder. Suspicion. Fear dressed up as authority. What's your clearance level? Patterson demanded. Your real clearance level. Jessica's hand moved unconsciously to her contractor badge. Secret clearance, sir. It's on my badge. Hutchinson stepped closer, invading her space in a way that made several people uncomfortable. That badge says secret, but your knowledge suggests something much higher. TS? TS/SCI? My badge accurately reflects my current clearance status, sir. Current. Mercer latched onto the word like a dog with a bone. What about previous clearances? Jessica's silence was answer enough. Gomez, nervous now but still playing to the crowd, pulled out his phone. What frequency would the strike package use for coordinated communications, if you're so knowledgeable? I'm not authorized to discuss have-quick specifications in an open forum. This is a classified briefing room, Gomez protested. Jessica's eyes swept the crowded space. With 73 personnel present, 26 of whom didn't sign the proper briefing roster acknowledging SAP access requirements. This conversation is already violating compartmentation protocols. Master Sergeant Price pushed through the crowd to the sign-in sheet by the door. She scanned it quickly, counting signatures against classification levels. Her face went pale. She looked at Jessica with something approaching awe. She's right, Price said quietly. Half these people aren't on the access list for special access programs. How does a contractor know about SAP protocols? An Air Force major in the third row asked, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Jessica said nothing. Her hands, resting at her sides, had formed loose fists. Not aggressive, defensive. The posture of someone preparing for impact. Patterson pulled up a reference image on the main display. IFF transponder codes, the kind used for identifying friendly aircraft in combat zones. Highly classified. What does this symbol mean? Jessica looked at it. Her mouth opened slightly, closed. I shouldn't answer that. Can't or won't. Won't. That's Mode 5 Level 2 IFF crypto architecture. Discussing it here would violate… How? Mercer's voice cracked on the last word. Jessica's professional mask slipped for just a moment, and underneath it was something raw, panic, the look of someone who'd carefully built a wall and watched it crumble in real time. I need to go, Jessica said, turning toward the door. Hutchinson grabbed her arm, not hard, but enough to stop her. Jessica looked down at his hand on her arm. When she looked back up, her eyes had gone flat and cold. Remove your hand, Colonel. The tone stopped conversations across the room. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a demand. It was a statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty of compliance. Hutchinson removed his hand. What's your real background? Patterson asked, his earlier mockery completely gone. Where did you work before this? I'm not authorized to discuss prior employment without proper security channels and NDA clearance, sir. That's convenient, Hutchinson snapped, his embarrassment transmuting into anger. You demonstrate classified knowledge, refuse to explain it, and hide behind security protocols. Those protocols exist for reasons, sir. I'm a colonel. I have top secret clearance. You will answer me. Jessica met his eyes. And I'm a civilian contractor. You have no command authority over me, Colonel Hutchinson. Security regulations supersede rank when it comes to compartmented information. The use of his name, delivered with that flat, professional tone, made it sound like she was reading from his personnel file. Several officers exchanged glances. Captain Mercer stepped forward, phone still recording. Maybe we should check her background more carefully. She could be a security risk. I've passed all required background checks for my position, ma'am. Then you won't mind if we verify that, right now. Jessica's face showed nothing, but her breathing had changed, slightly faster, slightly shallower. Master Sergeant Price recognized the signs of someone managing anxiety through controlled breathing techniques. Military techniques. Do what you need to do, ma'am. Hutchinson pulled out his phone, dialing
Security Forces. I want a full background verification on a contractor. Jessica Whitmore. Yes, I'll hold. The room waited. 73 people, most with their phones out now, recording the confrontation from multiple angles. This would be on private social media within the hour, spreading through military networks like wildfire. Jessica stood motionless in the center of the room, surrounded by hostile faces, her gray eyes distant as if looking at something none of them could see. Airman Park pushed through the crowd, his young face flushed and determined. This isn't right. She hasn't done anything wrong. Shut up, Park, Gomez hissed. No, Park said, his voice gaining strength. You're treating her like a criminal because she's smarter than you expected. That's not her fault. Airman Park, Mercer said dangerously, if you don't stand down right now, I will write you up for insubordination. Then write me up, ma'am. This is still wrong. Jessica turned to look at Park. For the first time since entering the room, her expression softened microscopically. It's okay, David. Don't hurt your career for this. The use of his first name startled Park. She'd never called him anything but Airman Park before. The familiarity of it, the gentleness, seemed to shake something loose in the room's atmosphere. Price moved to stand beside Park. The airman has a point. What exactly is Contractor Whitmore being accused of? Knowing things? That's not a crime. It is when that knowledge is classified beyond her access level, Patterson said. Then maybe her access level isn't what you think it is, Price said quietly. Hutchinson's phone conversation ended. He lowered the device slowly, his face unreadable. Security forces ascending someone. They're also pulling her full clearance file. Good, Mercer said. The problem, Hutchinson continued, his voice strange, is that her file is flagged as compartmented. The security forces NCO I spoke to doesn't have access to it. The room's energy shifted. Compartmented files didn't happen for contractors. They didn't happen for most officers. They happened for intelligence operatives, special operations personnel, and people involved in programs that officially didn't exist. Jessica closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she opened them, they were resigned. "How long have you been hiding?" Price asked softly. 2 years, Jessica answered, then seemed surprised she'd said it. "Hiding from what?" "From who I used to be, Master Sergeant." Before Price could respond, Jessica reached up and pulled her sleeve back deliberately. The burn scar was clearly visible now, silvered tissue running from wrist toward elbow. And beneath it, the tattoo. Not a romantic symbol or artistic design. Numbers. Military unit designation. 7174. Price's breath caught. She'd seen those number patterns before, in classified briefings about units that didn't appear on organizational charts. Task force designations, JSOC operational elements. "That's a Joint Special Operations Unit number," Price said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jessica pulled her sleeve back down. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." The door burst open. 2 security forces personnel entered, hands resting on their duty weapons but not drawn. Behind them came their commander, a stern-faced captain with military police credentials. "I'm Captain Walsh, Security Forces. Someone reported a security concern?" Hutchinson pointed at Jessica. "This contractor has demonstrated knowledge of classified systems and protocols beyond her clearance level. We need verification of her background and current security status." Walsh approached Jessica, his expression professional. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your credentials and ask you some questions." "Of course, sir." Jessica produced her contractor badge, her military dependent ID, and her driver's license, with movements that were parade ground precise. Walsh examined them, then pulled out a tablet and began entering information. His expression shifted from professional skepticism to confusion to something approaching alarm. "Ma'am, your file is showing restricted access. I'm going to need to escalate this." "I understand, sir. You'll need to wait here while we sort this out." Jessica nodded and moved to sit in a chair against the wall. She sat at attention without thinking about it, back straight, hands on knees, eyes forward. Perfect military bearing that her body remembered even when her mind tried to forget. The room buzzed with speculation. Officers clustered in groups, voices low but urgent. Phones glowed like fireflies in the fluorescent light. Price sat down beside Jessica. "You okay?" "I knew this would happen eventually," Jessica said quietly. "I hoped it would last longer." "What would last longer?" "The peace, the quiet, the not having to be who I was."
Before Price could ask what that meant, Walsh's phone rang. He listened for 30 seconds, his face cycling through expressions nobody could read. When he lowered the phone, he looked at Jessica with something new in his eyes, respect tinged with fear. "Ma'am," Walsh said carefully, "I've been instructed to isolate this situation. Nobody leaves this room until further notice." "Who gave that order?" Hutchinson demanded. Walsh's voice was flat. "Above my pay grade, sir, way above." The tension in the briefing room stretched like a wire pulled to breaking point. 73 people trapped in forced proximity, phones confiscated by security forces, waiting for something none of them understood. Jessica sat motionless in her chair, a statue carved from composure and old trauma. Captain Walsh stationed himself by the door, his 2 security forces airmen flanking him like sentries. Every few minutes his phone buzzed with text messages he read without expression. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, it was big enough to make a military police officer nervous.
Colonel Hutchinson paced near the front of the room, his earlier confidence eroding with each passing minute. "This is ridiculous. I'm the operations group commander. I have top-secret clearance. Someone needs to explain what's happening." "I don't have that information, sir," Walsh said for the fourth time. "Then get someone who does." "Already done, sir. They're on their way." Major Patterson slumped against the wall beside Captain Mercer, both looking like they'd sobered up from a drunk they couldn't remember starting. Mercer had tried 3 times to access her phone before Walsh made it clear that attempting to circumvent his communications blackout would result in immediate detention. Senior Airman Gomez sat in the corner, his face pale, looking at Jessica with something between fear and awe. The cocky enthusiasm had burned off completely, leaving only a kid who just realized he'd kicked something much larger and more dangerous than he'd understood. Master Sergeant Price remained beside Jessica, her presence a silent statement of solidarity. Park had claimed the seat on Jessica's other side, his jaw set in defiant loyalty despite the glares from senior officers. "How long have you known?" Park asked Jessica quietly. "Known what? That this would happen? That you'd eventually be exposed?" Jessica's gray eyes tracked to him. "Since the day I took this job. You can't bury the past forever. Eventually, someone digs deep enough." Was it worth it? The 2 years of quiet? Jessica considered this. Yes, every day of normal was worth whatever comes next. What does come next? "I don't know, David. That's above my clearance now." The phrase landed with bitter irony. Park opened his mouth to respond when the door opened with enough force to make everyone jump. Brigadier General Robert Cunningham strode into the room like a battleship cutting through fog. 6'2", 210 pounds, 54 years old, with hair buzzed to gray stubble and eyes that missed exactly nothing. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing parade ground perfect, and his expression suggested he was deeply unhappy with everyone present. "Room, attention!" Walsh barked. Everyone not already standing snapped upright. Jessica remained seated until Price touched her shoulder, reminding her she was technically civilian now. She stood anyway, muscle memory overriding 2 years of reconditioning. Cunningham's eyes swept the room, cataloging faces and finding them wanting. "Sit down, all of you." Everyone sat except Hutchinson, who held his ground at the front. "General, I can explain." "Colonel Hutchinson, unless your next words are, 'I apologize for wasting your time,' I suggest you stop talking and sit down." Hutchinson sat. Cunningham's aide entered behind him, carrying a tablet and a face that suggested he'd recently witnessed something profoundly disturbing. He handed the tablet to Cunningham, who studied it for exactly 15 seconds before his expression shifted microscopically. "Captain Walsh, who initiated the security inquiry?" "Colonel Hutchinson, sir. He reported a contractor demonstrating knowledge beyond her apparent clearance level." Cunningham turned to Jessica. His voice, when he spoke, was measured and careful. "State your name for the record." "Jessica Marie Whitmore, sir." "Current occupation?" "GS-7 contractor, Archives Division, Nellis Air Force Base." "Previous occupation?" Jessica's jaw tightened. "I'm not authorized to discuss previous employment without clearance verification and proper NDA protocols, sir." "Smart answer." Cunningham handed the tablet back to his aide. "Captain Walsh, I need this room cleared except for Colonel Hutchinson, Major Patterson, Captain Mercer, Master Sergeant Price, and Miss Whitmore." "Sir," multiple voices started. "Now, Captain." Walsh began herding people toward the door. It took 6 minutes to evacuate the room, every departing officer craning for a last look at Jessica. Gomez left looking like he might be sick. Park hesitated at the door until Price nodded permission for him to go. When the door closed behind the last evacuee, only 6 people remained in a room designed for 60. The silence was crushing. Cunningham pulled out his phone, dialed, and put it on speaker. It rang twice before a voice answered. Deep, gravelly, with the accent of someone who'd grown up in the Carolinas. "Cunningham, this better be important. I'm in a briefing." "General Reeves, sorry to interrupt. I have a situation that requires your immediate attention."
There was a pause on the other end of the line. General Marcus Reeves, if Hutchinson's expression was any indication, was not someone you interrupted lightly. JOS Commander, 4 stars. The kind of officer who made colonels nervous by existing. Go ahead. I have a civilian contractor here at Nellis who's demonstrated operational knowledge consistent with intelligence community experience. When security forces pulled her background, the file came back compartmented. Your office is listed as the clearance authority. Another pause, longer this time. Name. Cunningham looked at Jessica. Ma'am? Jessica Marie Whitmore, sir, she said toward the phone, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The silence that followed stretched for 8 full seconds. Then Reeves' voice came back, softer and with an edge of something that might have been concern. Jess? Jessica closed her eyes. Yes, sir. Jesus Christ, Jess. What did you do? My job, sir. Filed some papers. Apparently demonstrated excessive competence. A sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. That sounds about right. Put me on with the general. Cunningham took the phone off speaker, holding it to his ear. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. His face went through several expressions, none of them comfortable. When he ended the call, he looked at Jessica differently. Not quite the way he'd look at a superior officer, but not the way you looked at contractors either. Ms. Whitmore, General Reeves has authorized me to ask you a direct question. You're not required to answer, but he's requested you do so if you're comfortable. Jessica nodded. What was your operational call sign during Operation Silent Eagle? The room's temperature seemed to drop. Hutchinson's face went from red to white. Patterson's mouth opened slightly. Mercer looked between Jessica and Cunningham like she'd stumbled into a foreign film without subtitles. Jessica was quiet for 6 seconds. Price counted them. Overwatch 7, Jessica finally said. I was Overwatch 7. What does that mean? Hutchinson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cunningham didn't look away from Jessica. It means Miss Whitmore here was the senior NSA signals intelligence officer coordinating real-time intelligence for the Marine security element during the final evacuation at Hamid Karzai International Airport, Kabul, Afghanistan, August 2021. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the things everyone suddenly understood. Operation Silent Eagle, Kabul evacuation, the bombing at Abbey Gate that had killed 13 American service members and over 100 Afghan civilians. Oh my God, Mercer whispered. Cunningham continued, his voice taking on the formal tone of someone reading from a file. Captain Jessica Marie Whitmore, United States Air Force. 8 years with the National Security Agency Strategic Intelligence Division. 3 years embedded with Joint Special Operations Command. Multiple operational deployments to classified locations. He paused, making sure everyone was listening. Decorations include the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, Bronze Star with Valor Device, and the Purple Heart for wounds sustained during enemy action at Kabul. Patterson made a sound like he'd been punched. Captain Whitmore received a medical discharge in early 2022 due to combat-related PTSD and physical injuries sustained during the evacuation operation. Cunningham's voice softened slightly. She was cleared to discuss none of this with proper authorization, which she hasn't, until now. Hutchinson stared at Jessica like she'd transformed into a completely different person, which, in a way, she had. Captain? You're a captain? Was, sir. I separated 2 years ago. Why are you working as a file clerk? Jessica's composure finally cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but visible. Because I couldn't do intelligence work anymore, Colonel. Every time I sit at an analysis station, I see the faces of the people I failed to save. Filing documents doesn't require life or death decisions. Her voice went quieted. Nobody dies if I misfiled a folder. General Cunningham set his phone. Honed on the conference table with deliberate care. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone delivering testimony that would be remembered. For those unfamiliar with Operation Silent Eagle, let me provide context. August 26, 2021. Abbey Gate, Hamid Karzai International Airport. A suicide bomber detonated an explosive vest in a crowd of Afghans attempting to evacuate. 13 American service members killed. Over 170 Afghan civilians dead. Hundreds more wounded. He looked directly at Jessica. Captain Whitmore was the intelligence officer coordinating signals collection and threat analysis for the Marine security teams at that gate. She identified 47 separate threat indicators during the evacuation operation, allowing security forces to interdict multiple attacks before they materialized. Jessica's hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The bomber who succeeded, Cunningham continued, his voice gentle now, was one she didn't catch in time. The after-action review determined that no intelligence officer could have identified that specific threat given the communications environment and time constraints. She was exonerated of any failure. "That doesn't help," Jessica said quietly. "Staff Sergeant David Rodriguez, Corporal James Palmer, Lance Corporal Ryan McKay. I can name all 13. I can tell you which ones had children, which ones were getting married, which ones had just re-enlisted." Tears tracked down her face now, cutting through 2 years of carefully maintained composure. Rodriguez had 3 kids, twin girls 7 years old, and a son who was 5. Palmer was engaged. McKay's wife was pregnant with their first child. The room was absolutely silent, except for the quiet sound of Jessica's breathing, ragged and controlled in the way people breathed when trying not to sob. Master Sergeant Price reached over and took Jessica's hand, just held it, said nothing. "Captain Whitmore," Cunningham said, and this time the title wasn't courtesy, it was respect. "Your intelligence analysis directly saved an estimated 600 to 800 lives during that operation. The Marines who survived because you identified threats before they materialized, the civilians who made it onto evacuation flights because security was positioned correctly, they're alive because of you." "That's what the counselors say," Jessica whispered. "Doesn't change the fact that 13 people died because I missed something." "You were on site when the bombing occurred," Cunningham said, reading from his aide's tablet. "Sustained shrapnel wounds, concussive trauma, and partial hearing loss in your left ear. Despite your own injuries, you pulled 4 wounded Marines and 2 Afghan civilians to the casualty collection point before collapsing." He looked up. "That's what earned you the Bronze Star with Valor device, not the intelligence work. The fact that you ran toward the explosion instead of away from it." Colonel Hutchinson had gone absolutely rigid in his chair, his face cycling through expressions like someone watching their entire worldview collapse and rebuild in real time. Captain Mercer was crying silently, hands covering her mouth. Major Patterson stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Patterson asked, his voice hoarse. "Why let people treat you like that?" Jessica wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Because I wanted to be nobody. I wanted to be Jessica the file clerk, not Captain Whitmore, the intelligence officer who survived when better people died. I wanted to do simple work that didn't require me to make choices that got people killed." She looked at Hutchinson with red-rimmed eyes. "And I wanted to prove to myself that I could still serve, even if it was just organizing folders and delivering schedules. That I wasn't completely broken." Hutchinson opened his mouth twice before sound came out. "Captain Whitmore, there's no excuse. What I said, what I did, was based on incomplete information," Jessica said, cutting him off. "You didn't know. None of you knew. That was the point." "But we should have treated you with respect regardless," Price said firmly. "Your rank and background shouldn't matter. Basic human dignity should be default, not something earned through revelation." Cunningham's aide had been typing notes throughout the conversation. He looked up nervously. "Sir, how do we handle the 70-plus witnesses who were in this room earlier? They all saw and recorded the initial confrontation. That's a good question. Cunningham turned to Captain Walsh. How many people recorded classified material on their personal devices? Walsh consulted his notes. At least 30 confirmed, sir. Most were focused on Miss Whitmore's tactical analysis, which included classified operational details.
Details. Fantastic, Cunningham said dryly. Captain Mercer, you were recording as well, correct? Mercer nodded miserably. Yes, sir. I posted clips to a private social media group before Captain Walsh confiscated phones. How many people in that group? 240, sir. All Air Force personnel. Cunningham closed his eyes briefly, the expression of a man calculating the exact magnitude of an approaching disaster. Captain Walsh, I need every recording confiscated and deleted. I need statements from every witness that they will not discuss the classified information displayed in this briefing, and I need it done before close of business today. Yes, sir. Captain Mercer, you're going to personally contact every member of that social media group and inform them that any discussion or sharing of those videos constitutes a security violation that will result in immediate prosecution. Clear? Crystal clear, sir. Mercer's voice shook. Cunningham turned his attention back to Jessica. Captain Whitmore, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Yes, sir. Are you okay? Mentally, physically, emotionally? Because what happened today, being exposed like this, having your trauma discussed in front of hostile witnesses, that's not small. Jessica was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, sir. Ask me tomorrow when the adrenaline wears off. Fair enough. Do you have support? Therapist? Support group? VA counseling twice a month. Online support group with other PTSD veterans. It helps. Good. That continues. I'll also arrange for you to speak with our on-base counselors if you want. No pressure, just available. Thank you, sir. Cunningham stood, and everyone else automatically rose with him. He walked over to where Jessica sat and came to attention. Then, deliberately and formally, he rendered a salute. Jessica's body responded before her mind caught up. She stood and returned the salute, crisp and precise despite 2 years of civilian life. Captain Jessica Marie Whitmore, on behalf of the United States Air Force and every person whose life you saved through your service, thank you. Jessica's composure shattered completely. She dropped the salute and covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Price wrapped an arm around her, holding her steady. Hutchinson stood slowly, his movements uncertain. He approached Jessica like someone approaching a wounded animal, afraid of causing more harm. Captain Whitmore. His voice was thick. I have no words adequate for my behavior. I was cruel. I was dismissive. I used my rank to humiliate someone I perceived as powerless. He paused. You have every right to file a formal complaint against me. I won't contest it. Jessica lowered her hands. Her face was streaked with tears, but her voice was steady. I don't want to file a complaint, Colonel Hutchinson. You should. What I want, Jessica said carefully, is for you to remember how it felt to discover you were wrong, how it felt to realize you'd hurt someone who didn't deserve it. And I want you to carry that feeling into every interaction you have with people you perceive as beneath you. She met his eyes. Don't apologize to me. Apologize by being better. Hutchinson nodded slowly. I will. I swear to God I will. Patterson approached next, his face gray. Captain, I don't have words either. What I said about your marriage, your education, your career, it was vicious and unwarranted. You were following the colonel's lead, Jessica said. That's how toxic command climate works. It gives permission for cruelty. That's not an excuse. No, Jessica agreed. It's not. But it's an explanation. Fix the climate, Major Patterson. Don't let this be who you are. Mercer was last, and she could barely speak through her tears. I was jealous, she whispered. You were calm and composed, and I felt threatened, so I tried to tear you down. I'm so sorry." Jessica looked at her for a long moment. "Captain Mercer, your insecurity hurt me, but it also showed 67 people that bullying is acceptable. You need to fix that in yourself, and you need to address what you modeled for those junior personnel." "I will, I promise." "Good." Cunningham checked his watch. "It's 16:30 hours. I'm declaring this incident classified. Nobody discusses what was revealed in this room without clearance and need to know. Captain Walsh, ensure that message is crystal clear to every witness." "Yes, sir." "Colonel Hutchinson, my office. Tomorrow, 800 hours. Bring your misconduct file because we're adding to it." Hutchinson nodded, accepting the punishment without protest. "The rest of you are dismissed. Captain Whitmore, you're taking the rest of the week off with pay. That's not optional. Process what happened, talk to your therapist, and decide what you want your future to look like." Jessica nodded.
Nodded numbly. "Master Sergeant Price, you're with Captain Whitmore until she's safely off base. Make sure she's okay." "Yes, sir. My honor, sir." The room cleared slowly, people filing out in shell-shocked silence. When only Jessica and Price remained, Price squeezed her shoulder gently. "You did good, Captain. Held your ground, told your truth, showed them grace they didn't deserve. That's strength." "I don't feel strong, Master Sergeant. I feel exhausted." "That's what strength costs," Price said quietly. "Come on, let's get you home." 2 weeks later, the consequences had rippled outward like shockwaves from an explosion. Jessica spent the first week at home, sleeping poorly and talking to her therapist daily. The second week, she returned to work, bracing for hostility or pity, but finding something else entirely. Colonel Brad Hutchinson had been reassigned, not demoted, not court-martialed, but sent to a 6-month intensive leadership course at Maxwell Air Force Base with an accompanying notation in his permanent record. General Cunningham had made it clear during their meeting that Hutchinson's career advancement had hit a ceiling until he could demonstrate fundamental change in how he treated subordinates. The morning after his meeting with Cunningham, Hutchinson had appeared at Jessica's apartment door. She'd answered with Master Sergeant Price standing protectively beside her, but Hutchinson hadn't come to make excuses. "I'm leaving for Maxwell tomorrow," he'd said, his voice stripped of its usual command authority. "Before I go, I wanted you to know that I've requested assignment to an intelligence community immersion program. 3 months embedded with NSA analysts, learning what you used to do." Jessica had studied him quietly. "Why?" "Because I spent my career thinking intelligence personnel were support staff, lesser than operators. I used my position to humiliate someone whose daily decisions saved more lives than my entire combat deployment." He'd met her eyes. "I need to understand what I disrespected. Otherwise, I'll just be sorry I got caught, not sorry for what I did." She'd nodded slowly. "That's a good answer, Colonel. I hope the program teaches you what you need to learn." "Captain Whitmore." He'd stood straighter. "I know you said you don't accept my apology, but I'm going to earn the right for you to accept it, even if it takes years." He'd left then, and Jessica had watched him go with something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but might become it eventually. Major Kyle Patterson's consequences had been more immediate. He'd been removed as intelligence liaison, a position that required respect for intelligence professionals. His replacement had been handpicked by Cunningham specifically for his history of collaborative work with analysts. Patterson had approached Jessica in the archives office one afternoon, his red hair seeming dimmer somehow, his entire bearing subdued. Price had been present again, a silent guardian angel in camouflage. "Captain Whitmore, I won't insult you by pretending I can make this right with words." Patterson had set a folder on her desk. "This is a formal request for you to conduct a professional development session on intelligence operations integration for my unit, paid at consultant rates, your schedule, your terms." Jessica had opened the folder, scanning the official request.
Why would you want me to teach your people? Because they watched me disrespect an intelligence personnel and model terrible behavior. They need to see me treating you with the respect you deserve, and they need to learn from someone who actually knows what they're talking about. He'd paused. You can say no, I'll understand. Jessica had thought about it for 3 days before accepting, not because she forgave Patterson, but because his unit included young officers who needed better examples than what they'd witnessed. Captain Diane Mercer's fallout had been the most complex. The live stream incident, even though it occurred in a hallway rather than a secure space, had violated dignity and contributed to a hostile environment. Cunningham had assigned her to work directly with equal opportunity representatives, conducting base-wide briefings on professional conduct and toxic behaviors. Mercer had also personally contacted all 240 members of the social media group where she'd posted clips of Jessica's humiliation. Each conversation had been documented, each person required to sign acknowledgement of security violations and delete all copies of the recordings. When Mercer had finally approached Jessica, it had been in the base chapel's meditation garden, a neutral space away from official buildings and watching eyes. I've been in therapy, Mercer had said without preamble, talking about why I felt so threatened by you, why my first instinct was to tear you down. Jessica had waited, saying nothing. I spent my career being the only woman in most rooms, fighting to be taken seriously. When you appeared, calm and competent and taking up space without apology, it triggered something ugly in me. Mercer's voice had cracked. I wanted to diminish you before you could diminish me, before you could be what I was afraid I wasn't. That's honest, Jessica had said quietly. It's not an excuse, it's just the truth I'm working on. Mercer had handed her a small box. Inside was a challenge coin, custom-made, with the Abbey Gate Memorial on one side and 13 names on the other. I had these made. I'm giving one to each person who was in that briefing room, a reminder of what we almost destroyed with our ignorance. Jessica had held the coin, tears blurring her vision. Thank you, Captain. I don't deserve your thanks, but I'm trying to deserve your eventual forgiveness. Senior Airman Tyler Gomez had received an official letter of reprimand and mandatory mentorship assignment with Master Sergeant Price. At 24, he was young enough that the shame cut deep enough to potentially redirect his trajectory. Price had him writing essays on leadership failures and presenting them to her weekly. She'd also assigned him to volunteer at the base's Veteran Support Center, where he encountered other young veterans dealing with invisible wounds. When Gomez had finally gathered courage to approach Jessica, she'd been in the parking lot loading groceries into her aging sedan. He'd stood at a respectful distance, visibly nervous. Ma'am, I know I don't deserve your time, but Master Sergeant Price said I needed to apologize face-to-face, in my own words, without her present. Jessica had set down her grocery bags. Go ahead, Airman. I was cruel because I thought it would make me look good to officers I wanted to impress. I treated you like you were worthless because I wanted them to think I was valuable. He'd swallowed hard. I'm 24. You're 35. You've served in combat. You've saved lives. And I thought mocking you would make me seem important. That's unusually self-aware, Airman Gomez. Master Sergeant Price doesn't let me hide from myself, ma'am. She makes me write down exactly what I did wrong and why. He'd pulled out a folded paper. This is my 14th essay. She says when I get to 50, I might actually understand something. Jessica had almost smiled. Price is good at that. Ma'am, I'm truly sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I hurt someone who'd already sacrificed more than I can imagine. You deserved respect, and I gave you contempt. That's on me, and I'm working to be better. Airman Gomez, you're 24. You have time to become someone better than who you were that day. Don't waste it. I won't, ma'am. I promise. The base's response had been more surprising than individual consequences. Master Sergeant Price had organized an informal gathering at the flight line, inviting intelligence personnel and NCOs who'd heard what happened. 37 people had shown up. They'd presented Jessica with a shadow box containing replicas of her decorations. Someone had pulled her DD-214 from official records and recreated the honors she'd earned. The Bronze Star with Valor device gleamed next to the Purple Heart and Defense Meritorious Service Medal. Airman First Class David Park, who'd found his courage that day in the briefing room, had given a short speech. His voice had shaken, but held. Some of us knew there was more to Captain Whitmore than we could see. Some of us just knew she deserved basic respect regardless. But all of us learned that rank and job title tell you nothing about a person's value. Captain Whitmore showed us what quiet professionalism looks like. She showed us grace under pressure. And she showed us that the people we underestimate might be the ones who've already proven themselves in ways we can't imagine. The gathered personnel had applauded, and Jessica had accepted the shadow box with shaking hands. She'd said only 4 words. "Thank you, all of you." Later, Price had pulled her aside. "General Cunningham wants you to know that your actions that day prevented what could have been a career-ending incident for multiple officers. You showed restraint, followed security protocols, and demonstrated leadership despite being targeted. That's noted. I don't want recognition, Master Sergeant. I just want to do my job. I know. That's why you deserve it." The junior personnel who'd recorded the confrontation had been required to attend security briefings on classified information handling and complete remedial training on professional conduct. Several had written letters to Jessica, awkward and sincere, acknowledging their role as witnesses who'd done nothing to intervene. One lieutenant, 26 years old and fresh from officer training, had written, "I
Watched them mock you, and I said nothing, because I was afraid of becoming the next target. That's cowardice. I'm sorry. I'm learning that silence in the face of injustice is complicity." Jessica had kept that letter. The broader impact rippled through Nellis over weeks. Junior officers and enlisted personnel who'd heard the story secondhand approached their own support staff differently. The contractor workforce reported fewer incidents of dismissive treatment. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a shift. General Cunningham had mentioned it during a staff meeting. One incident, one person standing up for herself, one public reckoning with our failure to treat people with basic dignity. And suddenly everyone's remembering that every person on this base contributes to the mission, regardless of rank or position. He'd looked directly at his assembled commanders. That shouldn't take a crisis. That should be default. Fix it in your units. 3 weeks after the incident, Jessica sat in her small living room at 300 hours, awake from nightmares that therapy helped manage but couldn't eliminate. Her phone buzzed with a message from her PTSD support group. "Bad night? Same as always. You? Yeah, wanna talk?" They'd texted for an hour. 2 veterans helping each other through darkness. And by 400, Jessica had managed to return to sleep. The next morning, her phone rang. General Cunningham's office. "Captain Whitmore, the general would like to meet with you. Tomorrow, 1000 hours. He has a proposal." Jessica had agreed, curiosity mixing with apprehension. Whatever came next, she'd face it the same way she'd faced everything else. One step at a time, carrying the weight of the past but no longer buried beneath it. General Cunningham's office was exactly what Jessica expected. Flags in the corner, commendations on the walls, a desk that had seen decades of difficult decisions. He gestured to a chair across from him, his expression unreadable. "Captain Whitmore, thank you for coming. Coffee?" "No thank you, sir." Cunningham sat down, folding his hands on the desk. "I'll get straight to it. I want to offer you a position. Instructor for intelligence officers rotating through Nellis for red flag exercises. 2-week courses focused on tactical intelligence support for complex air operations." Jessica's stomach tightened. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I can handle operational intelligence work again. I'm not asking you to. This isn't about life or death analysis.
It's about teaching junior officers how intelligence integration actually works, how to communicate with analysts, how to respect the process. He paused. How not to be the officers who stood in that briefing room and mocked someone whose daily work saved lives they'll never know about. Jessica was quiet for a long moment. What would the schedule look like? 2 days a week teaching. You'd keep your GS7 position the other 3 days if you want it. The filing work, the quiet routine, whatever helps you maintain balance. You'd let me keep both jobs? Jessica. He used her first name deliberately. I'm not trying to force you back into who you were. I'm asking if there's a middle ground where you can contribute your knowledge without destroying your peace. She looked at her hands. The burn scar visible on her left forearm. The weight of 2 years trying to be invisible. Can I think about it? Take a week. No pressure either way. Your choice, your timeline. Jessica had thought about it for 6 days. She'd talked to her therapist, her support group, and Master Sergeant Price. She'd sat in her apartment at 200 hours, unable to sleep, weighing fear against possibility. On the 7th day, she'd accepted. The first class had 15 junior intelligence officers, fresh-faced and eager, ranging from 23 to 29 years old. They'd filed into the classroom with notebooks and tablets, expecting standard PowerPoint presentations about intelligence cycle methodology. Jessica had stood at the front of the room in civilian clothes, her contractor badge still clipped to her belt beside her new instructor credential. She'd waited until everyone was seated before speaking. I'm Captain Jessica Whitmore. Before we start, I'm going to tell you about the worst mistake I ever made. The room had gone completely silent. She told them about Kabul, about Operation Silent Eagle, about the 47 threats she'd identified and the one she'd missed, about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's 3 children, about Corporal Palmer's fiancé, about Lance Corporal McKay's pregnant wife. Intelligence work carries weight, she'd said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her face. Your assessments affect real lives, real families, real futures. You will never have perfect information. You will never have enough time. And you will live with your decisions for the rest of your life. She'd shown them her Purple Heart citation, her Bronze Star justification, the shadow box that sat on her desk at home. This isn't about scaring you away from the career field. It's about making sure you understand what you're taking on. Because if you can't handle the weight, it's better to know now than to fail when someone's life depends on you getting it right. 3 students had cried. 2 had stayed after class to talk. 1 had dropped from the intelligence track entirely, recognizing she wasn't ready for that responsibility. Jessica had supported that decision completely. The teaching had been difficult but different than operational work. She wasn't making real-time decisions with lives hanging in balance. She was sharing hard-earned knowledge with people who needed it. The nightmares didn't stop, but they didn't increase either. After 2 months, something shifted. A young female second lieutenant, 25 years old and dealing with imposter syndrome, had approached Jessica after class. "Ma'am, I've wanted to work in intelligence since I joined ROTC, but people keep telling me I'm too young, too experienced, that I should wait, that I haven't earned the right." Jessica had recognized herself in that lieutenant's face. "What's your name?" "Second Lieutenant Amy Foster, ma'am." "Lieutenant Foster, I was 23 when I started NSA work. People told me I was too young too. Age isn't the barrier. Commitment to accuracy is. Willingness to carry the weight is. Let me help you prepare." She'd started an informal mentorship program. Once a week, over coffee in the base dining facility, she met with junior intelligence personnel who needed guidance. Not operational advice, but career counseling, professional development. Someone who understood the unique pressures of work where mistakes cost lives. The program grew. 5 mentees became 10. 10 became 20. Master Sergeant Price joined as co-mentor, bringing enlisted perspective to complement Jessica's officer experience. But healing wasn't linear. 6 weeks into teaching, Jessica had woken at 0300 hours from the worst nightmare she'd experienced in months. The explosion, the screaming, Rodriguez calling for his team. Palmer's blood on her hands. McKay dying despite everything she'd tried. She'd texted her support group, hands shaking. Can't breathe. Can't stop seeing them. It's been 2 years. When does it stop? The responses had come within minutes. It doesn't stop. It just becomes something you can carry. Breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. I'm here. You're not alone. They wouldn't want you drowning in guilt. They'd want you living. 0300 is the worst hour. It always is. But 0600 comes. Morning comes. You've survived every bad night so far. You'll survive this one. By 400, Jessica had managed to sleep again. The next morning, she'd gone to her scheduled VA counseling session and talked through the regression. Her therapist had reminded her that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning to live alongside the pain. That afternoon, she taught her class on intelligence fusion and cross-domain coordination. 15 students had learned things that might save lives someday. Maybe that balanced the scales a tiny fraction. 4 months after accepting Cunningham's offer, Jessica had been approached by a familiar face in the archives office. Colonel Hutchinson had returned from Maxwell, thinner and quieter, his pale blue eyes holding something they hadn't before: humility. "Captain Whitmore, I completed the NSA immersion program." Jessica had looked up from her filing. And I spent 3 months watching analysts process information under impossible time constraints with incomplete data, knowing their assessments would determine whether operations succeeded or people died. He'd met her eyes. "I had no idea. I spent 15 years thinking intelligence was easy support work, and I had absolutely no idea." "Most people don't, Colonel. I wrote a paper as part of the program on intelligence operations integration and the costs of disrespect between career fields. I'd like you to read it if you're willing. Tell me if I got it right." Jessica had read the paper that evening. 30 pages of technical analysis wrapped around a thesis that boiled down to: everyone in the military chain is essential, everyone carries weight, and rank tells you nothing about sacrifice. She'd emailed him feedback, professional, detailed, acknowledging where he'd accurately captured the intelligence perspective. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was forward motion. The story of Jessica's exposure had become legend on Nellis, passed between new arrivals as cautionary tale and inspiration simultaneously. Don't underestimate people. Don't judge by appearance. Treat everyone with dignity, because you never know what they've survived. 6 months after that day in the briefing room, Jessica received a package. Inside was a handwritten letter and 3 photographs. The letter was from Rodriguez's widow. Someone had told her about Jessica, about Kabul, about the guilt she carried. The widow had written, "Captain Whitmore, my husband spoke about the intelligence team constantly. He said you were the reason they came home safe from dozens of missions before Kabul. He trusted you completely. What happened at Abbey Gate wasn't your fault. David knew the risks. He chose them willingly. Please stop carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you. Honor him by living fully, not by destroying yourself with misplaced responsibility." The photographs showed Rodriguez's twin daughters and son, now 9 and 7 years old, smiling at a playground. Alive and growing because their father had made a choice and Jessica had done everything humanly possible. Jessica had cried for an hour. Then she'd placed the photos on her desk beside the shadow box, a reminder that survival wasn't betrayal, and that carrying others' memories forward was its own form of service. The final scene came 8 months after everything changed. Jessica sat in the same briefing room where she'd been humiliated, but the atmosphere was different now. She was at the front, teaching, 15 new students watching her explain intelligence operations coordination. The door opened mid-lecture. A contractor entered with administrative documents, young and nervous, clearly new to base operations. She wore khaki pants and a plain blouse, her contractor badge reading GS5. One of the students, a cocky first lieutenant, opened his mouth to make a dismissive comment. Jessica's voice cut across the room like a blade. "Lieutenant Morrison, before you speak, remember that every person in this building contributes to the mission.
That contractor might be a veteran. She might have a degree in aerospace engineering. She might be working her way through family tragedy. You don't know her story, so you'll treat her with respect. Clear? Morrison's face flushed. Yes, ma'am, clear. Jessica turned to the contractor. Thank you for the delivery. I'll sign for those documents when class breaks in 15 minutes. The contractor smiled gratefully and left without incident. After class, Lieutenant Foster approached Jessica. Ma'am, that lieutenant looked like he was going to say something terrible. He was, but he learned something today that's more valuable than anything in the syllabus. Jessica packed her materials. Never judge people by their position. Everyone's fighting battles you can't see. Like you were, like I was, like I still am. Jessica touched the scar on her arm. Healing isn't destination, Lieutenant Foster. It's a journey you take one day at a time. That evening, Jessica sat in her apartment with a cup of tea, looking at the shadow box and the photographs of Rodriguez's children. Her phone buzzed with a message from her support group, veterans sharing their daily victories over darkness. She typed her response. Today, I stopped someone from making my mistake. Today, I taught 15 people to respect what they don't understand. Today was hard, but today was good. The responses came quickly. Pride, solidarity, understanding. Jessica Whitmore was 35 years old. She was a separated Air Force captain with combat decorations and invisible scars. She was a GS-7 contractor who filed documents 3 days a week and found peace in simple routine. She was an instructor teaching junior officers lessons paid for in blood and trauma. She was still fighting the war that lived in her head at 0300 hours. Still carrying 13 names like stones in her chest. Still learning that survival and guilt could coexist without destroying her. But she was also teaching, mentoring, and showing people that everyone deserves dignity regardless of rank or position. She was honoring the dead by living with purpose, not by drowning in what-ifs. The filing cabinet in the briefing room stood against the same wall where her humiliation had begun. But now, when Jessica approached it, people nodded respectfully. Students called her captain. Her story had become a reminder that the person you underestimate might be carrying more weight than you can imagine. And in the quiet moments between teaching and filing, between nightmares and morning light, Jessica Whitmore was slowly learning something her therapist had been telling her for 2 years. She hadn't failed those 13 service members. She'd honored them by continuing to serve in whatever way she could manage. The guilt would always be there, but it no longer had to be everything. She was more than her worst day, more than her trauma, more than the sum of her mistakes and sacrifices. She was someone learning to live again, and some days that was enough.